Welcome, or hopefully welcome back to The Reluctant Entrepreneur. On this podcast, we look at what it truly means to start, grow, and lead a business through conversations with people who have experienced it firsthand. My guest today is Todd Hagopian, a business transformation expert, author, and former company owner who has led multiple corporate turnarounds and scaled and sold his own business. Todd is best known for his work helping organizations identify stagnation, eliminate unnecessary complexity, and focus on what actually drives performance. But his expertise was forged through personal reckoning. Early success in his career was paired with extreme intensity, untreated bipolar II disorder, and self-destructive behavior that eventually forced him to confront how unsustainable his approach to business had become. Losing the manic edge he once relied on pushed Todd to systematize what had previously been instinctive, leading to repeatable frameworks that he later applied across multiple business transformations. Today's conversation is broken into two parts. First, we'll explore Todd's entrepreneurial journey and the experiences that shaped how he leads. Then we'll discuss his approach to identifying stagnation, eliminating comfort, and making the hard choices that allow businesses to survive and grow. If you're a business owner who feels busy but not effective, this episode offers a perspective worth hearing. My conversation with Todd Hagopian begins right now. Stick around. Hi, Todd. Welcome to the show. I'm so glad you're here.
Hey, Mike. Thank you so much for having me. This is going to be great.
For those in my audience, for the benefit of those in my audience, when I was researching Todd, I saw a video of that Todd had put together about his journey, and I'll find a link to it and I'll put it in the show notes. But maybe even before you watch this entire episode, watch that video. It is the most compelling, most moving, most inspirational, scariest videos I think I've ever seen, and it's so well put together. So anyway, I would never normally say stop watching, stop listening, do this first, but I think it's worthwhile. And certainly, if you can't do it, reverse the order. At some point, you got to see that video. And obviously, we're going to be talking about elements of what he told in that story throughout this conversation. So, Todd, you've shared very openly, shockingly openly, about a moment at 25 years old that could have ended everything. Looking back now, why did you describe that period as the first place where clarity actually began?
Yeah, so 25 years ago, I had just closed a monster deal. It was one of my first jobs, financial advisor, working a pure commission, just closed a monster deal and ended up in an exceedingly slow police chase across Ann Arbor, like just a comically slow police chase at like 2 p.m., just completely drunk, and what it was is for years, I had kind of had these huge wins in business and then followed by dramatic personal failings, and it just was a cycle. And I thought it was a work hard, play hard thing. I didn't know any better. It had just always been that way. And that arrest, though, at 25 years old, really showed me that I needed to get a hold of it. I needed to change some things and change how I was doing things. Um, so I decided to start drinking alone. That was my solution. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no more social
So
drinking.
yeah, exactly. So this was like, this was like 10 years prior to actually hitting rock bottom when I should have hit rock bottom. You know what I
So,
mean? And
so when you're in the back of that police
like,
car after the world's
yeah,
slowest police chase,
yeah.
that was not rock bottom.
No,
That was
actually, I
you were
always
still on the
joke
10th
around.
floor, right?
Yeah, I always joke around that really should have been rock bottom, and instead I tricked my body into continuing that for about 10 years. And 10 years later, what ended up happening is I had, and we can get deeper into the story, but I essentially had a bunch of health problems all hitting me at once, and the doctors couldn't figure it out. Like my chest hurt and I had migraine and I could barely see, and all this stuff was hitting me, and I'm 35, right? And they're like, "What is going on with this kid?" And finally they're talking to me And it comes out that I sleep about 90 minutes a day, and have for about 15 years, and they were like, wow, that's not normal, and so somebody finally goes, after all the tests were coming back normal, they finally were like, have you ever talked to a psychiatrist, and I was like, why would I mean, like chest pains, and so
Yeah.
I went in, and within minutes, they were basically like, you're really, really bipolar. And so I heard that and went to another one and another one. They all said the same thing. And as they were telling me what bipolar is, because a lot of people don't know, right? It's really the cycling between these high hypomanic episodes where you have all kinds of energy, goal oriented, focused, a lot of good things, right? And then you cycle into just a little bit too hypomanic, where you start doing stupid things, and then boom, you hit these bipolar depression areas, and that's where like you have 20 times the suicide rate and all that stuff that goes along with bipolar. That's not good, and so I was listening to all this, and I'm like, yeah, that's exactly right. I guess I do have it. The good thing is 90% of what you just described is why I'm so good at business. So this is great. It's not bad at all,
So it's your
And then they're like,
it's your superhero, right? I mean,
yeah,
that's
that's right. That's exactly right. So it didn't click at that point. Like still hadn't hit rock bottom. Like I was in there for a pretty dramatic reason. Still hadn't hit rock bottom, and they're like, the good news is that the medicine we're going to give you is going to fix your bipolar and fix your headaches. You just need to take a little more of it for the bipolar. And I was like, that's great. Just give me the headache dose. Like now that I know I have bipolar, I'll be fine. Just give me the headache dose so I can keep doing what I'm doing. And about 6 months later, I finally hit rock bottom where it was like, okay, that's not working. I need to quit drinking. I need to get on the medicine, and I need to get through this, and actually treat. Like I had 2 kids at the time. Now I've got 4. You know what I mean? And it's like I need to be here tomorrow, so I need to
yeah.
get this right.
A wave of responsibility passed over you.
That's exactly right. And then the next wave that hit was that the medicine worked really well. So I mean, it was like people that didn't know, nobody knew I had bipolar. I didn't tell anybody that, you know what I mean? And people were actively coming up and saying, "You seem more present," and this and that. Probably because I was sleeping like 3 hours a night instead of 90 minutes. You know what I mean? Like
Double,
there's some things that
double
go
the amount
along
of
with that.
sleep.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Um, but the problem is I completely lost my business edge. Just completely lost it. Everything that I was before, and the
The
reason I
highs
had
were
become
gone, right? The
the
highs were
highs were
gone.
gone.
It
Yep,
clipped. It
exactly.
clipped you. The highs were
It
lower.
totally
The
did.
lows were higher, right?
That's 100% what happened, and it was so dramatic that it was obvious, to me because I knew it, but also to people that I was working with. They were kind of like, "Wow, like he's not doing what." Like I mean, I was a 35-year-old global marketing director for a really big company, and all of a sudden it was like I'm trying to live up to all these promises I made during the highs, and I'm like, I can't do it. I'm gonna have to go off the medicine and start working 22 hours a day again. You know what I mean? And like that's the problem with bipolar is that's why people do it, is because they need to get back to what they were doing before. And so I finally said, I'm not going to do that. I need to systematize some of the things I was doing before so that I can mimic the hypomania but stay healthy, and that slowly happened. It was kind of like, okay, in this role, I need to get these 2 things that I used to do, and really get them so that I can keep doing this role the way I was supposed to. And then the next turnaround came, and I had a couple other ones that I had to systematize. And by the third turnaround, I ran into this thing where it was like in the 13th month, I went, oh man, I forgot to do that other thing that I did in the other 2 turnarounds. You know what I mean? And so that's when I decided to start writing it down and really systematizing every aspect of the disorder that was good and trying to get it to where I could implement it. And by the time I got to the 4th turnaround, I had it all written down. I nailed it. You know what I mean? Everything, boom, 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 in order. And at that point, I looked back and I said, you know what? I think I can teach this. I think I can teach people this because all my lieutenants have been doing it for years. They just didn't know that they were following bipolar inspired business strategies. You know what I mean? and that's what brings me here today. So that's how I got into turnaround management, and basically that's how I came up with the hot system that drove the book and all that stuff. So
Yeah, and we'll definitely dive into that.
yeah,
You've described going from 20-hour days to 8-hour days. That's,
Yep.
the high versus
Yeah.
the average and the low.
Yeah.
And feeling like you started to suck,
Yeah.
when you started working what mere mortals work every day. How did that force a reckoning with, or how did that force a reckoning with how you were actually creating value, right?
Yeah.
I mean, clearly
Yeah.
you didn't feel as sharp, but where was
Right.
that moment?
Yeah, and it was really interesting. So yeah, I always joke around. It was like for an entertainment reference, I went from like Tony Stark to Tony Stagnant. Like it was just dramatic. You know what I mean? It was like I just suddenly I was not there. And now usually I work 10 to 12 hours a day, so I'm still up there in the high in the high amount. But it's not 22, and you inherently will get less done. When you're working 10 hours a day instead of 22. And so
Do you find the quality of your
so
work though is better at 10 versus 22?
that's the key. So the quality gets better, and then more importantly, what I really started working on was the productivity and the efficiency of the work. So at 22, I would take any meeting and I would just fill up my day, and it was all about staying busy, And a guy once told me this, and I really took it to heart, and then have since put it into different frameworks. But he goes, poor people add. They just add stuff to their day and they stay busy and they think busy equals billions, and that's what they do. Rich people multiply. They look for these multiplier impacts and they add things to their day that can be exponential, and get bigger. But he goes, billionaires subtract. They take stuff out of their day. They focus on the things that only they can do and make sure that they spend all 40 hours doing things that only they can do. And that really stuck with me and has become a big part of a lot of my frameworks.
And if my research was correct, you learned that example after running into a billionaire
Yeah.
who you were telling him how busy, I think you were having lunch with him or something. You were
Yeah.
telling him how busy you were. And
Yeah.
almost, I took that as almost to the point of, oh yeah, you've got billions, but look how busy I
Yeah.
am. I mean, it was like
Hey,
a
that's exactly
point
right.
of pride, right? A boastful
Yep.
pride.
That's exactly
So you
right.
showed him the
I,
calendar and tell me what he said, and then tell me the calendar he showed you of his.
Yeah, so it was basically like that's your problem right there. You know what I mean? So I mean, I've had weeks where I've had 60 meetings in a week. Because I on purpose schedule them at 15 minutes so I can just go boom, 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 and bounce around. And he was basically opened his calendar and it just had a handful of meetings. But the point of it was not the number of meetings; it was that every meeting he had was about things that only he could do, and then he outsourced or systematized or automated everything else, right?
That's a
So it was just
subtractive
all about
process, right?
that's
Taking
the
away
subtraction.
things
Hmm.
so that the only few things left are high quality,
Yep,
high value,
yep, yep,
ROI oriented activities,
yep.
right?
And then we looked at my calendar, and it's like meetings about meetings and report outs about report outs and innovation sessions that we know we can't afford, and all this stuff that you do to stay busy, but are not going to drive dollars to the bottom line. And that was basically the message was like that is your problem right there. You're still in the poor people ad category. You haven't even gotten to the rich people multiply because you've been relying on this 20-hour a day schedule. You know what I mean? Like if you got down to 10 hours a day, you'd probably get to the rich people multiply. And that's what happens as you get to director and above, you start learning that stuff. And then, but he goes, you really need to get to the subtraction. And then right at that time, I had been learning about 80/20 and all that stuff from
Mm.
ITW because I did a tour there and they're kind of the kings of 80/20. And I started to put all these into my own framework that was all about productivity and focus and kind of using this hypomanic, version of productivity and focus, which is just really dramatic. You know what I mean? And then that's how it all started.
It's funny you mentioned ITW. I'm very familiar with ITW and their 80/20
Yeah.
rule. They own
Yeah.
a few companies in our industry
Yeah.
and
Hmm.
that I know very well. And when ITW purchased them,
Hmm.
several years ago. They purchased a handful of companies and created kind of a
Yeah.
portfolio of companies
Yeah.
within our
For sure.
industry.
Yeah.
And when that 80/20 rolled out, it we could see from the outside looking in a very different version of
Yeah.
those companies, and
That's right.
somewhat a little less passionate and
Hmm.
more systematized. It either
That's right.
fit
Yeah.
or it didn't. right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and I think in their in that world, it was probably good. I mean, you can't argue with
Yeah.
a company that owns 500 other businesses that are
Sure.
pretty much all
Yeah.
successful, right? So it's like,
Right.
okay, I can
Yeah.
critique it because it doesn't make sense
Yeah.
to me,
Yeah.
but it does seem to work. It's definitely
Yeah.
a principle that they put everywhere.
I, I will tell you that it's a company that I've worked for many companies. It is the best company I've ever worked for at making money. And
Yeah,
they just have that down to a science. And the 80/20, interestingly, the way they do it is different. And so I've modified it a little bit to fix some of the issues that I've seen and that you've probably seen. And then I even was talking to an ITW 80/20 director the other day, and it was so interesting because I was bringing up this book that I'm going to, of course, blank on the name on right now. But oh man, it's by Christensen, one of these innovation books. But anyway, it kind of shows the downside of the 80/20, and it was fascinating to me because I've been preaching 80/20 for 10 years, and this book just decimated the argument. Now there's ways you can mitigate
yeah,
it, you know what I mean? But it is a really great. I mean, that the nice thing about the ITW toolbox that they had, I've used it in food equipment. I've used it in $45 shopping carts. I've used it in $2,000 plastic components, and I've used it in $2.5 million beverage equipment. It works no matter what.
yeah,
You know what I mean? So that's the good part about it. But yeah, you definitely have to put some emotion and some
yeah. To
and
me, it
some
lacks
logic
the
filters into
emotion.
it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but to me, it lacks that entrepreneurial spirit.
that's right. Yeah,
And ITW is one of those few companies in North America that no longer goes by that only goes by their acronym because
yeah,
Illinois Toolworks doesn't really
yeah.
apply anymore. That's like 3M,
Exactly. Yeah, yeah.
and
That's right.
AT&T. I mean, they're if you say their long names, it's like right out of the
Right.
1800s or something. But
Yeah, exactly.
when you were in your transition period, did you ever fear that stability would cost you relevance or
Oh yeah.
ambition?
Yeah, for sure. So during when I was global marketing director for ITW, one of the ITW companies, and I was very scared that first year. And then I got promoted to business unit manager, so I was running the company. So I was like, okay, it's working. People are nobody's freaking out. Um, but when I moved to the next company, I went and worked for Berkshire Hathaway for a while and ran a shopping cart organization for them for a couple of years. And I actually got fired during COVID. Now, it was more COVID than anything else. They've been making bonuses for the last 5 years on the stuff we did. So they did just fine, but they eliminated a
Yeah.
level of
It's,
management. You know what
they
I mean?
basically said, thanks, we'll take it from here.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah, you did so good. We don't need you anymore. So, but anyway, that moment is where it really hit, and it was like, oh crap, like now, now I don't know if I have what it takes. I have to. I had always been following people in my career who had taken me because they knew me, and for the first time, I was going to have to do something, on my own and find my own path and really put this thing into practice with people who hadn't seen me do it before because that was how it was so easy before is everyone was hiring me because they knew what I was going to do. So
Yeah.
there was no surprises. They hire me, come in, I do it, and then we move to the next one. And that is actually when I decided to buy the business. So that lends right into the small business story that you had mentioned before. So
Looking back now that you have some perspective,
yeah.
do you believe that entrepreneurship in general rewards intensity or clarity?
Excellent question. So my whole my whole frameworks reward extreme focus, which of course combines intensity and clarity. But I
Yeah.
would say that the focus is for sure the more important part of that because you can if you think about how hard you work and how efficient you are, you can work super hard and not be very efficient, and you'll have terrible results. So the focus, which allows you to drive that efficiency lever, really is, I think, the difference maker in most entrepreneurs because all entrepreneurs work hard. Like that's part of the DNA. If you're gonna
Yeah.
take the leap, we all work hard. It's the focus and the efficiency portion of it that matter. I think.
You were able to correlate the patterns in your life with patterns in business, which
Hmm.
which is a really good observation. And I've heard you say that the patterns that were destroying you personally were the same patterns killing companies. You were able to see, a similarity there. What are those? What specifically are those patterns, and why do leaders struggle to see them in themselves?
Yep. Yeah. So the patterns I was talking about when I made that mention is really so when you're in a company and you start to think about, what am I going to focus on going forward? And there's 100 good ideas, right? And we're all focused on these 100 different ways we can make money, especially entrepreneurs. We're super bad at this, even in the solopreneur and even the small entrepreneurs, right? Like somebody dangles a dollar and you go and run after it. And that was that whole like 70 meetings a week, mentality, like just go after everything and something will hit. And during stagnation, during points of stagnation in companies, when they're struggling to figure out what they want to be when they grow up, because what they were is starting to crumble and starting to slowly disintegrate, they do this where they lean too hard on what was making them money in the past, and they come up with 1,000 ideas of what could make them money in the future, but they commit to none of them because they're scared of letting go of the sacred cows. And those that was kind of like in my version. Like I would get bored at work because we were stagnant. I wasn't getting any innovation money. Can't come up with a new product, so I'm bored. So I start looking at all these other ways we can make money, either wild ways at work or side businesses for me. You know what I mean? And I just start spending all my time on this other stuff that's more interesting, but not it has no money attached to it. And instead of trying to fix the problem, and the problem is that cash cow was going to run out, and I had to get a 3 to 5 year strategy in place to drive the business. And so that those are the patterns that I started to see. And so it all comes down to getting crystal clear at where you're going, and how you're going to use focus and drive to get there. And that's where that whole Karelin method comes in, where it's really activity times efficiency times focus equals your results. And that's what I love to talk about, because it's a productivity framework that allows you to really think about what you need to do to make as much money as possible every minute of the day. And that's the mantra. Make as much money as you can every minute of the day. And if you truly live to that, you will succeed while other people fail.
Fascinating. You make a strong claim that comfort, not strategy, is what kills companies. How does comfort show up in organizations long before the financial damage appears?
Yeah. Yeah, I always say comfort kills more companies than competitors ever could. And the idea there is that, you know, if you think about consulting industry, right, there's 10% of the companies in any given time are kind of like super growth companies, and they need these massive strategies to grow rapidly. 10% of companies are in this super crisis mode, and they bring in people like me to come in and just transform the company and rip it to shreds, turn it around, and then be back to normal. But there's this 80% of companies that are in this fight with stagnation. And the problem is they hire these consultants that all give us the exact same advice, right? It's all these books behind me. We've all read the same 20 books. We know exactly what they say. You're doing it. I'm doing it. We're all doing the exact same thing. Nobody's going to get ahead doing that. And then inside of industries, even, they've got, you're in the electrical industry, they've got the electrical playbook that they hand to you, and then they go and sell the same playbook to your competitors, and
Sure,
everyone's got the same playbook. And
sure.
so the idea is stagnation hits you in so many different ways: your talent leaving, not doing enough innovation, not having the right 9 year plan, and this and that. And so what we work on here is really trying to figure out, how can those companies think differently for breakthrough results. And that's the idea. And that's where this whole bipolar inspired business strategy came in, is you have to be able to think differently unless you want to manage the exact same way as all these other folks are managing. And so I think that's what I'm bringing to the table, is more of a, let's take some existing frameworks, modify them in both extremity and focus, and help entrepreneurs and bigger businesses find ways to deliver different results than their competition.
Going back to comfort, you actually
Yeah.
have an example of what happens when you eliminate comfort. I believe during COVID, you bought a company that
Yeah.
was, pretty much on in hospice, right?
Yeah.
Not a
Yeah.
hospice business. The business was a hospice patient. It was
Yeah.
dying, and you deliberately eliminated the concept of comfort. What were the hardest decisions you had to make in that turnaround? I mean, did
Yeah.
you already
And
know? Were you already convinced comfort's the issue, or was there
yeah.
no other choice?
And so to make that tie, like comfort and stagnation, it's about being comfortable. Like you might not be dying, but you're making enough money that you don't need dramatic change, and you see things going down, but it's not so bad that you're about to go out of business. And so that's kind of where this company was, is it was like, a 50-year-old company. They weren't going anywhere, but they had shrunk over time and they weren't growing. The owner was working like 10 hours a week. You know what I mean? And I looked at it and I said, okay, we need to eliminate the stagnation and try and drive growth into this company. And so, yeah, there were a lot of things right off the bat that needed to be changed in a super old company where everybody had worked there forever, and change was going to be impossible, quote unquote impossible. And so what we did is I came in and started changing as many things as I could behind the scenes and tried not to have it impact people's daily lives. So, for example, a real quick example would be like the quoting mechanism, right? They had a specific way to quote, but most of the time the owner did it, and then they would shoot it out to the customer and this and that, but there was no automated way to do it. So what I did is I put in a calculator, right? How people always do, but that way you could quote, I could quote, anyone could quote. It'd be the exact same dollar amount at the end. It was very precise, right? And it also allowed you to do a quote in 5 minutes instead of wait for the owner to check
Mm.
back in a day later. You know what I mean? And then on top of that, I had it linked to a sheet that I controlled that had pricing. And so these were customized solutions, but the pricing was built off of the raw material and the work that went in and things like that. And so I had this complex price sheet. And what that allowed me to do was actually raise prices without talking to the employees, because the
Mm.
employees are the first line. They'll be like, you can't do that. This
Yeah.
customer's been here forever. They're
Right.
gonna know, what nobody knew. Right. It's a
Right.
customized solution. They're not buying the same thing over and over again. Nobody ever
Yeah.
knew. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so I was able to just randomly put price increases in and they never knew it. So it completely eliminated that kind of guard against comfort, which is I don't want to ever have a tough conversation.
Yeah.
I don't want to have that conversation with the customer, so I don't want to put a price increase in. And that right there allowed us to completely change the way business was, because we started to charge more for complexity, charge more for smaller customers for smaller orders, charge less if you buy volume. You know what I mean? We were able to drive the difference between the value brand and the premium brand
Mm.
got smaller, so we could step people up to the premium brand, right? How do you do that? You raise the value brand price and just shrink the step, so that then it was easier for us to say, but you could pay a little bit more and get XYZ.
That's what I
And
call
and
the
so
ugly waitress theory. Someone complains about their food, so they hold the platter up next to their head and they go, "Well, how does it look now?"
yeah. Yeah. It's so funny, but it's like I mean, it's the easiest way to completely change a business. So not only did our pricing go up, which drove profit, our mix went up. More things went to the premium. Right, we were able to then negotiate better with the premium supplier. You know. Who, by the way, was the one that ended up buying us when we exited the business? Do you know what I mean?
Hmm.
Like all this stuff kind of goes together and how this all
Sure.
worked out.
Sure.
And so, drive business to them and push their biggest thing. So all of a sudden we're their 80. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
and now all of a
Exactly.
sudden we mattered more to them. And yeah, so that was an example of like going after comfort. The comfortable thing was, we're making a few $100,000 a year. We don't really need to change anything. And COVID costs were going crazy. And it's like, yeah, it'd be better if we didn't raise prices and have these hard conversations. And I'm like, sorry, it's about to get hard. Like, there's a global pandemic and our prices just went up 10%. We're not going to hold prices. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. When you say comfort, it reminds me of a book that I read that really inspired me to make some smart decisions about how to run my company. And that book was written by Jim Collins called Good to Great.
Yep.
And he coined the phrase, good is the enemy of great. And that is so true. It was very true in my experience. And I equate good to comfort. It's comfortable to feel good.
Yep.
We were doing so poorly in the earliest days of our company that when I got to the point where we were doing good, I'm just like, okay,
Yeah.
don't do anything. Don't change a thing. I'm so relieved to be doing good. And that held us back for several years from being great. We had the capacity to be a great company, which I believe we are now. But I was too afraid to let go of the satisfaction and the consistency of good for the risk of trying to be great, right?
Yeah.
It's like that Kenny Rogers song, "The Gambler." You got to know when to fold.
Yep.
You got to know when to double down. I don't think those were the right words, but the point is, I was just like, okay, I've reached the end of my risk tolerance, and I'm doing good. Stop, Mike. Stop while you're ahead. And that was a very hard decision to come to start embracing, the Hollywood cliche phrase is, you're good isn't good enough. That's tough. It's tough to tell someone you quit being so comfortable, right?
Yeah. Well, and the best businesses to buy are the people who have been comfortable for a few years, because you know that there's something there that needs to transform. Somebody the other day in a podcast asked me, they said, when do you know that a company needs to transform? And I was basically like, well, if it's been 2 years and they haven't fully transformed over the last 2 years, then it's time again.
Yeah.
Because in business nowadays, 2 to 3 years is the
Oh, the
window.
cycle
Like
is much faster now than it
yeah,
was
you
before.
have to completely transform in that time period, or else you will hit crisis eventually. Like you're probably going down. If I start ticking off the symptoms of stagnation, your best talent leaving, not putting enough money into innovation, haven't improved a system that needs to improve. Like all these things, everyone that's listening is like, yep, our company does all those things. Like that's the problem, is so many companies are somewhere in between this massive growth and this crisis situation, and they're not doing anything about it. Now's the time. And really, when it cemented in my head was the first time I took over a company that wasn't in crisis mode. It was 10 times as easy to do that turnaround, and we made 10 times as much money, 10 times as fast. And the idea there, it really solidified this whole declare war on stagnation brand in my head, because it was like, man, I keep getting brought in and dropped into these terrible companies and have to fix them. And it's like there's no fun day until the last day. You know what I
Right.
mean?
Right. Well,
But
you're
when I got
arguing
dropped
with
in,
people the
yeah,
whole time,
yeah,
right?
yeah. But when I got dropped into a company that wasn't there yet, they were still making a lot of money. They were just on the downswing. We were able to hockey stick that company like crazy, because there was still a good, solid financial foundation. We didn't have to go in and rip everything to shreds. We just had to attack the stagnation that they were suffering from, and it made it so much easier. And the turnaround was rapid, less than a year, dramatic. We doubled our sales. It was phenomenal, and that's when it really solidified to me that this is what these companies need, is aggressive, extreme focus. And if we can systematize that and put it into a system that they can follow, you don't have to be bipolar. You're not supposed to be bipolar to use this system. You're just supposed to understand the frameworks and implement them, and just know that they came from thinking differently. It doesn't matter where they came from, but they came from thinking differently about this stuff. And that's where I get really passionate now, because that one time just taking over a company that wasn't quite, terrible yet, changed everything.
You've challenged ideas like consensus and excessive psychological safety, things
Yeah.
that as an employee, we want consensus, nirvana, kumbaya, everyone
Yeah.
hold hands. Where do these concepts cross the line from healthy to harmful?
Yeah, yeah, that's a great question, and sometimes the headlines are fun, you know what I mean, and they're not quite as dramatic as that internally, but the idea there is, consensus kills companies, and the idea is you need decision dictatorship, and that does not mean that the leader is making all the decisions and driving it down in the company, and that people are just doing what he says. What it means is that every decision has an owner, and that you don't need 10 meetings and 10 approvals to get that decision done and implemented in the company. So it's very similar to a RACI chart, that a lot of people have dealt with, who is responsible and accountable and informed and this and that consulted. But it's a more extreme version. And it's the idea of decision dictatorship is making sure that every decision has one owner. Everybody knows who that owner is. And then if you take it a level further, every meeting has a decision. So we don't have meetings about getting ready for meetings about getting ready for a decision. Like, that's not how it goes. Every decision has a meeting, or every meeting has a decision, and you're really trying to get to a decision oriented culture. And so that's that whole consensus versus decision dictatorship. And I do get that question a lot. But I would tell you that if you talk to my employees, they will say that I set the direction. You know what I mean? And I'm pretty open with that. Like, I am going to set the 3 year direction. There are going to be a 9 box of goals that we're going to follow. But the next thing that I say is really important. There's a raise your hand rule. And if you're ever asked to do anything that is not in one of these 9 goals,
Mm.
you have the responsibility to raise your hand and challenge your manager and have them explain to you why you're doing what you're doing.
Yeah.
And there's going to be times when we say, you know what, we just got to get it done. But there's also going to be times where I sit back and go, nope, that's a good point. Like, let's figure out what we need to do, and what you should really be working on to drive as much money as we can every minute of the day.
I'm going to go back to the subtractive
Yeah.
policies that you have,
Hmm.
which are probably really difficult to get if you're required to have consensus, right?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
that subtraction is in someone's
Yeah.
wheelhouse and they don't want to lose it.
Yeah. Hmm.
I've learned kind of the hard way over the years that less is more. And
Yeah.
I used to think the solution to everything was growth, add more product, add more SKUs, add more services, and
Yeah.
then you just live in this world of non-spectacularity, right? You're just like
Yeah.
an also
Hmm.
ran. One of the most striking examples that you give is the elimination of 60% of SKUs. This is one of your
Hmm.
experiences. You basically eliminated 60% of your products and fired 10% of your customers,
Hmm.
which
Yeah.
I love that story because
Yeah.
I write in my book about my experience in hiring the right customer. Right,
Yeah.
we sit around like wallflowers at a
Yeah.
prom waiting for people to ask us to dance, the
Yeah.
customers, and it turns out
Hmm.
it's really a mutual relationship. We
Yeah.
vet our customers as much, maybe even more than customers vet us, or at least we should. We
That's
didn't
right.
for a long time. But anyway,
Yeah.
you got rid of 60% of SKUs, you fired 10% of your customers, resulting in higher revenue and doubled profits.
Yeah.
So that's a great example of how it really works and how
Yeah.
difficult that would be if you're
Yeah.
trying to maintain consensus and make everyone feel good.
100%. And here's the best part of that story. And you'll probably laugh at this. You just said 60% of the SKUs, 10% of the customers doubled EBITDA. I have no idea which company you're talking about, because we've done that exact same thing at 3 of them. Do you know
Wow.
what I mean? Like
Yeah.
it's the method that we do. It doesn't matter if we're making $45 shopping carts, $2.5 million food equipment, or $2,000 plastic containers. You know what I mean? Like, that has worked at all 3 of them. We've done that exact same math, and so, and it might even be worse. Like, when I was doing appliances, it was more than 60% of the SKUs. You know what I mean? When we were doing the shopping carts, it was more than 10% of the customers. You know what I mean? Those are kind of the floors. And so the
Hmm.
idea there is you look, so this is the 80/20 matrix of profitability, right? And so you take a look at all your customers and you line them up by revenue. Take a look at all your products and you line them up by revenue. And then you do a actual revenue and margin analysis on every single customer product combination that you have. And this, if you can imagine, I run some big companies, right? This can be 4 walls wide. analysis when you're running a big company. I mean, the refrigeration division was $900 million. There's a lot of customer product combinations. But the idea here is that the top the top 20% of your customers are going to drive 80% of your revenue. It almost happens every time, right? The top 20% of your products are going to drive 80% of your revenue. And that upper quadrant where you have your A customers and your A products is the quadrant that you have to focus on. Okay, that's where you're making all your money. But the lower quadrant where you have your B products and your B customers, I guarantee you is where you're spending all your time. And
Hmm.
what you'll find out is that you're probably actually losing money in that bottom quadrant, and you're begging people to take your products at a loss, usually. and so,
Yeah.
and when you do the quadrants out, the top quadrant's always this big, and the bottom quadrant is this big,
Yeah.
and then the other two quadrants have just different rules. It's like, okay, when you have an A customer buying B products that you don't want to build anymore, can you outsource them? Can you raise the price? Can you raise the minimum quantity? Like, there are things that you can do to make those products okay for you, you know? And when you have a B customer who's buying an A product that you do want to make, it's all about how can you get that B customer to buy more of it so that they become an A customer,
Yeah.
and
Sure.
and, and so there's different strategies for each of them, but it's so important, and that's where you get this, where every line item, then you make a decision and you start saying, I'm going to cut these 60% of SKUs, I'm going to cut these 10% of customers, and I'm going to shrink that huge matrix down into where we're making money. You know what I mean? And that's the whole point of it. And yeah, every single, I mean, that's why it's so funny. I have no idea what company I was talking about in that, because I've done it three different times. And by the way, the EBITDA, same thing. We've doubled the EBITDA in all three of those. So it's just, it happens. And that 80/20 matrix of profitability is the driver. And then you implement the other frameworks around it. But you have to understand your product customer combinations in order to get there.
It reminds me of the myth that I used to convince myself, and I think a lot of business owners convince themselves of this myth, is like, well, we lose money on every sale, but don't worry, we'll make it up in volume. Right?
Yeah.
It's like, nope.
The math doesn't work. Yep.
Math does not work that way.
Interestingly, if you do make money on every sale, you will have exponential EBITDA on higher volume. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So like once
Yes,
you get
exactly.
it down to the right
But the
quadrant,
negative doesn't work
volume.
that way.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
You got to
That's
be
what I always tell
you got to be
people.
above zero in
Yeah.
order
Yeah.
for math to multiply, because anything
That's
divided by
exactly right.
zero is zero, right? I mean,
Yep. Yep.
so
And that's what I always tell people, is like, you have to have incremental direct contribution margin for that equation to work, because I hear that all the time, right? So you have to have incremental direct contribution margin fall into the bottom line. And if that's happening, then you're right. The more volume, it'll make up for itself.
yeah,
Now that still doesn't mean you want 5% margins and stuff like that, but at least you can make that argument. But you can't when
sure,
you're losing money.
yeah. Well, the whole idea of the levels of business that are out there. There's the ultra high end, and let's talk about like clothing stores, Saks Fifth
Sure.
Avenue, Nordstrom, whatever.
Yep.
And then you've got the middle, Kohl's and J.C. Penney and
Yep.
Macy's, and then you've got the ultra low, which might be Amazon, Costco, whatever. The two segments that make the most money are the very high and the
Yep.
very low.
That's 100%. Yeah.
And in the middle is everyone else, because it feels safe. There's comfort in the middle.
Yep.
But no one
That's
stands
100%.
out in the middle. They're incestuous. They're cannibals. They just go after each other's customers. No one stands out. No one's spectacular. To be at the high, when I started my company, I did one thing right, and then I screwed things up for a while. But the one thing I did right is I realized that, okay, there's a high and a middle and a low, and most people want to start in the middle. I didn't want to start in the middle because it's just too competitive. So I'm like, okay, I did a survey before I opened the doors, and I figured out what all my competitors were charging, and I went like 20% more. I'm just, okay, no one's going to like beat us to the top. They're all going to try and
Right.
beat us to the bottom. So,
Yeah.
so I'm going to just, if we're going to lose, if we're going to fail fast, right? So if we're going to lose a customer over price, we probably didn't want them anyway. So we went up there. Part of me thought, well, can we really do it? Be the cheap ones, the Amazon, the Costco brand. and Walmart and all that. But it costs in the retail world, it costs billions of dollars to be able
That's right.
to make a 3% margin,
Yeah.
successful for you. It
Yeah.
works, but most companies can't afford
Yeah.
to sell at that low margins that the big players sell at because they had to put billions in. Amazon lost money for more than a decade, big money
That's
for
right.
more than a decade.
Yep.
Their cash flow was basically investor funds,
Yep.
and but they did it because they had a vision that once they hit a certain volume,
Yep.
then they'll start making money. And of course, they're one of the most valuable businesses on the planet today. You
Yep.
ask your the people that you consult with. You often ask these leaders if they had 24 hours to save their own company, what would they do first? Which is an
Yep.
amazing question. Why do so many leaders already know the answer, but it took the question to even have them mouth the words?
Yeah, it's a fun question to ask because almost everybody can answer it at the tip of their tongue. Like, well, we absolutely have to launch this next new product. We absolutely have to, get our margins right or whatever the answer is. And then, of course, the follow up question is, if that's the only thing that you would do to save your company in the next 24 hours, then why wasn't it done a year ago? You know what I mean? Like, why haven't you done it yet? What is the holdup? And oh, resources, focus. We got to do these 10 things and this and that, and it's like, well, no, it's the most important thing. you have to be, you have to always be. So prioritization is just such a key part of the frameworks that I put together. Is that you have to be working on what makes you the most money every minute of the day. And so the three metrics that we always talk about is revenue per minute, profit per minute, and flow through. So how much of your total revenue, extra revenue, is going down to the profit line? You know what I mean? And when I come into a company and I look at the numbers, those are the only three numbers I need to know. If you give me those three numbers, I can tell you the healthier business. I can tell you whether you're going to survive another year or 3 years or whether you're dying real quick.
Hmm.
Because if you're, and it's not about revenue per total minutes in the year. It's about revenue per man minute, right? How much are you making per person? And then how much profit are you making off of that revenue? And the direction of those tell me everything I need to know. If your revenue per minute is going up and your profit per minute is going down, then there's something in the overhead or in the effort or in the part of their day that's not working, right? If the flow through is going down while the other two are going up, then you've got some serious overhead issue that you need to figure out what's happening. You know what I mean? And there's just ways to look at these three metrics and completely figure out what's happening inside of a business. But you have to, when you get down to the focus and you're really focusing on, am I making decisions? And is my calendar set up? Your calendar does not lie. Is your calendar set up in a way that every hour of the day, I'm making as much money as I can? You know what I mean? And when you do that right, these three metrics are going to be going in the right direction. And those three metrics, I most people have never heard those metrics before, maybe flow through. You know what I mean? But they have no idea how to impact it. They just know that they have to track it. Those three metrics are what you have to be focused on every day if you want to have a profitable company.
Excellent. We're almost out of time. I just have two more
Yep.
questions for you.
Sure.
For the entrepreneur who may be listening or watching, and they sense stagnation, but really haven't come to the point where they admit it yet, what's the first honest question they need to ask themselves?
Yeah. That's a good one. I think, do you know where you're making your money and where you're losing your money today? And do you know where you're making or losing your money 3 years from now?
Hmm.
Do you know what I mean? Like that's really what because you may have a cash cow today that's printing your money that they know is going away in 3 years. They're just
Yeah.
too scared to change it or get away
Yeah.
from it. You know what I mean? And then the follow up questions revolve around like how much of your time is spent on those things, that are making money today and tomorrow. Like there will be a role in my organization who has both responsibilities. They need to make as much money as they can today and make as much money as they can in 3 years. And that's the guy who owns the prioritization inside the organization because that person, and sometimes it's me, but that person needs to figure out, like, are we going to make money today or are we going to make money tomorrow? And they're constantly doing that trade-off analysis. But those are the things that entrepreneurs tend not to spend all that much time thinking about. And it really should be the only thing. Remember that you need to spend all of your time doing things that only you can do, and
Yeah.
only you can decide where you're going to make money 3 years from now. You know what I mean? You have to be spending time on those topics.
Yeah, it's hard. When I started my company, I was chief cook and bottle washer. It was me. I was like a
Yep.
restaurant with one server, one chef, one
Yep.
busboy, and they were all me. And as I started bringing in a workforce, there were some things I enjoyed doing, but they can do it just as well, if not better than me. And that was
Yep.
hard because I
Yep.
felt like I was accomplishing something when just by the measurement of how busy I was and
Yep.
how many hours in a day I worked. I'm like, I got to be successful. Look, I'm working 15, 18 hours a day. Therefore, ergo, I'm successful.
Yeah.
Ergo,
Right.
I'm not, right? And now I don't have any time to really do anything about it because I'm too busy
Yep.
driving the stupid forklift because I like driving forklifts, even though I have
Yep.
forklift driver. That type of mentality. It is hard to pry the founder of something,
Yep.
away. The last question, Todd, how did you define success when you first started your entrepreneurial journey, and how do you define it today?
Yeah. So when I first started, right, paying my employees and still having some left over to pay me was just
Right.
fine. Like that was,
Money. Yeah.
yeah, cash flow was the success driver. Like, yes, I'm going to be able to survive another month. Now it really is. If I'm not doubling EBITDA every 2 or 3 years, there's a serious problem, because in almost every business it's possible. You know what I mean? In almost, unless I've been in that business now 8 years, and it fixed everything, and we're only got our core customers and our core products, then maybe it gets harder. But really, that's that. When I came into this last business, that was the thing. Is like, we have 2 years to double EBITDA, and we did it in 1 year. But the idea is if you're not doubling EBITDA every 2 years, then something's not working in the transformation. It is not. I shouldn't say this, but it's not that hard to double EBITDA in a stagnant business. If you
Right.
have a stagnant business and you fix the stagnation, you declare war on the stagnation, there are ways to double EBITDA extremely fast. And if you go from not having a real good 5 year plan to having an incredibly good 5 year plan, you can do it twice. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Well, it's like the to modify the lyrics of a popular song, the first cut is the deepest. I would say in this case, the first cut is the easiest. It's
Yeah.
very easy to prune the trees and
Yeah.
cut things that need to be cut. I remember many years ago, we wanted, we were trying to raise revenue, we're trying to lower costs. So we're raising the bridge and lowering the water, all at the same
Yeah.
time. And on the lower the water side of it, I was looking at what can we cut, and I decided to look at our expenses in a very granular level. I basically went through the chart of accounts, and I went through
Yeah.
every chart of account. Now, obviously, cost of components, labor, all that is relative to the amount of revenue we're bringing in. So I didn't do there, but I looked at everything else: entertainment, travel, subscriptions, all that
Yeah.
stuff. And I probably cut maybe 20% of our costs out of
Yep.
stupid stuff that I didn't even know we were spending money on,
Yep.
because they just became kind of automatic, right? And
Yep.
some of them were quite literally automatic, SAS
Yeah.
services, subscriptions, all that. So that was so easy to do. And then it was so easy, I'm like, a couple months later, I'm like, I'll do it again. And I just went through
Yeah.
and I found another. I didn't find a dramatic of savings, but I found another worthwhile. And now to the point where I don't do that very often now, because it's
Yeah.
so optimized that
Yeah.
I'll start actually digging into the foundation a little bit. I'll
Yeah.
remove a keystone
Yeah.
of our company, and then
Sure.
everything will
Yeah.
crash. So, but
Yeah.
that's certainly an interesting endeavor, and it is easy when you're fixing something to see a radical change. I think the challenge in doubling EBITDA every year or two is when you're firing on all cylinders, when you're fully
Yeah.
optimized, because that
Yeah.
that is a unicorn at that point,
Yep. And where I go with that is it comes down to orthodoxy special. The easiest way to make money is to take an orthodoxy that everybody believes is true in an old, boring business and to say, what if it's not true? And then change it. So to your point, like going after the chart of accounts, yes, awesome. Get that 20% out. The next 20% that you go after is your people's time. And so
Yeah.
then you do process,
Yeah.
process optimization. I always do process innovation before product innovation, right? And so that gets you the next 20%. And then the next 20% is the process or the product innovation. And that's where you're saying, you know, what is so process might be, it takes 12 months to make a $2 million machine. Well, what if we did it in 6 months? Okay, now you go from 27% close rate to 100% close rate. You go from discounting every machine to not having any discounts because nobody else can do it. So you either take it or you don't. You know what I mean? Now the product innovation is the next one and that's like, okay, now what if that machine does it really need XYZ? The whole industry thinks it does. What if it didn't? What would we make if that was not true? And then you come and you go down that alley and try and figure out if that is actually a way to change the industry. And those are the people, when you look at all these billionaires, that's what they've done to continue to double EBITDA every couple of years.
Wow. So Todd, just before we go, you have a book, a brand new book. Tell me about the name of the book and what it's about.
Yeah, absolutely. So, The Unfair Advantage Weaponizing the Hypomanic Toolbox is actually a business fiction book that takes you through somebody implementing this toolbox of tools, this hot system. And so, a bipolar billionaire kind of mentors somebody who's running a shopping cart manufacturer, which, by the way, I've done. So, a lot of it is real
I
life
see a lot.
scenarios.
I see a lot of
Yep.
mirror here.
Yep, yep. So it's a really cool way to learn the system. I love business fiction because it allows you to go back and remember a scene. A lot of these scenes are going to be right there. Like you're going to be like, "Oh man, I've had that exact conversation and we did not do things that way." And so it's a real nice way to be able to recall and then implement some of these strategies. I got another book coming out later in the year that goes deeper in as a nonfiction, but this book is a nice quick read just and it'll stick with you and you'll remember it and be able to implement it.
Well, there's not a lot of fiction business-oriented
Mhm.
books out there. They're all nonfiction. They're all, the
Yeah.
world according to the author, right? So
Yeah.
yeah, I'll definitely have to get a copy of that. I'm assuming it's available on Amazon.
Yes, sir. Yep. The Unfair Advantage by Todd Hagopian. It's on Amazon.
Excellent. Well, Todd, this has been a fascinating and inspiring conversation. I really enjoyed talking to you. For my audience who would like to get more information on Todd's company, if you're watching this on YouTube, look down here and where it says show more, and you'll find links to Todd's company, as well as that video that I really want you to watch. If you're listening to this on your favorite podcast app, then of course, when it's safe to do so, look at your podcast app and that information will be there as well. But check out that video. It's a great example of how one can identify self-destructive behavior and work their way out of that self-destructive behavior. And, whether it's the specific events that Todd battled or any other, litany of self-destructive behaviors, we all have them. But it's a pretty inspiring journey. It was very low to very high. And I would strongly encourage my audience to watch it. And in terms of a video production, it's amazing. I think Steven Spielberg made it, or he could have anyway. It's very good.
I appreciate that. I'll let him know you said that.
Yeah. Tell Steve I said hi, and sorry, I'll send him a holiday card later in the year. But Todd, thanks so much for being my guest. You inspired me, and I talked to a lot of entrepreneurs, and this was definitely inspirational. And keep up the good work.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Mike. I really appreciate you.
Yeah, me too. Well, that's a wrap. Thanks for joining me on this episode of the Reluctant Entrepreneur Podcast. A special thanks to Todd Hagopian for being my guest on the show. We've been very busy recording future episodes with fascinating guests, so be sure to subscribe and get notified when new episodes drop. And one personal favor, if you're watching this on YouTube, give us a like and subscribe. Those two simple clicks really help us expand our reach. If you're an entrepreneur or know someone who would make a great guest, I'd love to hear from you. Visit reluctantentrepreneur.podcast.com to apply or recommend a guest. You can also reach me directly at mike@reluctantentrepreneur.podcast.com. And a very quick shameless plug, if you're interested in my book, The Reluctant Entrepreneur, Anatomy of a Business Startup, From Uncertainty to Unstoppable, it's available in paperback and Kindle on Amazon and as an audiobook on both Audible and Amazon. That's it for today. Thanks for listening or watching. Until next time, be unstoppable.